Welcome to VLGA Connect. My name is Catherine Arndt and I'm the Chief of the VLGA Connect studio. I hope you enjoy today's Connect episode brought to you by the VLGA, the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of the Governance Update from VLGA Connect. It's our end-of-year edition, and we thought we might do something a little different, a little special, shall we say, and bring the team back together for a discussion on how the year's been from a governance viewpoint. I want to firstly introduce Julie Reid, the former Executive Director of Local Government Victoria and a former Council CEO and a sometimes co-host here on the Governance Update. Hi, Julie. Welcome back.
Hi, Chris. Great to be back.
Good to have you here. Very recently, we've had quite a number of guest appearances from Tony Raunic at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, and Tony's good enough to join us again for this week's discussion. Hi, Tony.
Great to be here again, Chris.
Good to have you, and I'm particularly pleased not to at all downplay those first two guests that I introduced, but particularly pleased to welcome back to the fold for one night only, Stephen Cooper. Hi, Stephen.
Oh, hello, Chris. Thanks for the greeting, and hi, Julie and Tony.
Lovely to have you back with us. We wanted to have a quick whip around the main stories of the week, but then spend a bit of time looking back on 2022, which has been, I think everyone would agree, a pretty interesting year. And I heard someone say just this past week, we thought 2020 and 2021 were challenging, but for different reasons. 2022 perhaps has been more difficult as we try and find a new way of working. Do any of you care to comment on whether you think this year's been more challenging perhaps than the two big COVID years?
Certainly, Chris, that's what I'm hearing from the CEOs that I've been speaking to in the sector. They're saying they can't believe how challenging this year has been. They thought that it was going to be easier, and it just seems to be getting harder and harder each year. So let's hope that 2023 brings a little bit of a reprieve or something for the councils.
I wonder, Chris, too, whether sometimes in an emergency, the responses are binary. You either do something or you don't. Whereas there is so much choice and uncertainty, coming out of, if we're out of it indeed, that COVID situation, that maybe that contributes to what you were talking about.
It is concerning, isn't it? Because we're starting to hear numbers are increasing and there's a peak happening. I don't know whether in a local government sense we've found the new way to live with COVID, or whether we think, I don't know if you're hearing anything, Tony, whether we think there's another challenge coming in how we continue to operate and deal with this.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that when we don't hear as much about it, but the numbers are actually really strong out there in terms of the COVID cases. But perhaps we have learnt to live with it, if I can put it that way. We've certainly learnt to work in different ways, and I think if we had to refocus very quickly because of a new variety coming through, then I think we've proven that we're able to do that, and particularly this sector has proven it's able to cope well.
Yeah, good points. Let's have a quick look at some of this week's stories. I think the big one is we've finally got the results. They're all in from the state election, and I don't know because I don't have any way of testing this, but I think 9 sitting councillors being elected to either the lower or the upper house must be a record outcome. Does anyone know?
I don't know the answer to that. No. But I think it is really significant for the sector, and I'd even put it right up there in terms of there's some of the significant things that have happened this year, and for me it's what do we do with this moving forward? How do we maintain these connections with these individuals now in the parliament who have had that strong connection to local government? Do we VLGA and some of those other, peak bodies have some sort of forum where we're talking to those parliamentarians and not only supporting them, given their backgrounds in local government, but keeping them, front of mind for them, some of the challenges that we face in the sector. And I wonder what it means for things like rate capping. What does it mean for, the ongoing cost shift, or constitutional recognition, things like that. I mean, these are now people who are lawmakers, decision makers there, who've got some direct experience of the challenges that we face in the sector, and hopefully they're able to, articulate that to their colleagues.
So, Tony, you're really saying it's an opportunity to have some dialogue about local government, keeping local government at the forefront, because we've got all of these representatives now with that experience. Do you see it that way, Julie?
Yeah, I do. I think it is a great opportunity, and the numbers sound high to me compared to previous elections. So I think it is a great opportunity for us to now think about the way that we can shape advocacy going forward, knowing that we've got some really strong advocates in there for local government. I know some of the councils are sad because they've lost some really good councillors, and they're anxiously awaiting now who they're going to get next. I heard one council say that it was later in January that they're expecting to hear that they get who they're going to get in as a replacement. But and obviously sad that they've lost a really, really good councillor. But, that's life, and now we've got to take that opportunity and run with it.
Chris, I think it also changes our mindset going forward, because state and local government election dates seldom align. And what we've noticed then, and there is a bit of community antagonism, I suppose, to councillors who jump to or seek to jump to other levels of government, but that is the new reality. And perhaps it's never been so important to do, as you've all talked about, for the sector to, seize on this opportunity to actually advocate to those other levels of government. So I think, look forward in the future to whenever there's a federal or state election, there will be sitting councillors who'll stand, because local government's always been that proving ground.
Yes, absolutely. And the demonstration of what's possible, I guess, particularly through this last state election, might empower and embolden others to throw their hat in the ring next time. So just for those who haven't caught up, and I need to do this off the top of my head because I haven't filled out a list yet, in the lower house, Kim O'Keefe in Greater Shepparton has been elected for the Nationals. Now, that countback's been scheduled for the 16th of January, Julie, so you're right, mid-January.
Yep.
And Jade Benham, the former mayor at Swan Hill, elected to the seat of Mildura, that countback's been scheduled for the same morning, so they're an hour apart on the 16th of January. We've had word from Mornington Peninsula that with Paul Mercurio's election, there will be a by-election, no date yet, so that will take longer, obviously, because of the electoral structure of that council. And as of this morning, I've seen nothing official about Yarra, but that's where Gabrielle de Vietri has been elected to the lower house. And then, of course, this week, the results in from the upper house, and it was looking like 4, but it finished up being 5 councillors elected. So Moira Deeming at Melton, Trung Lu at Brimbank, Joe McCracken at Colac Otway, Catherine Copsey from Port Phillip, and the one that sort of sneaked in at the last was Sarah Mansfield from Greater Geelong. So there'll be, whatever those electoral structures are, countbacks or by-elections there too. So a total of 9. It's going to be a busy time. And the other thing, of course, that someone mentioned to me yesterday raises is the need for all of those councillors to be thinking about those councils to be thinking about how they induct those new councils into existing teams with 2 years of the term pretty much to go.
Chris, can you indulge me if I jump on a hobby horse?
Sure, go for it.
Because I think often what we forget at this time is there's a tendency for existing councillors to say, oh, we've got this new person, we need to bring them up to speed. And you change one person, you've got a new group. Yeah. So it is a really good opportunity for councils to go back and revisit how they work together to make sure, everyone's on the same page, because, that's an opportunity then rather than a threat.
Yeah, I agree, Steve. I think there's going to be, shift in dynamics with those groups. Not a bad time to think about values of the group, think about how they work together as a team, the relationships between councillors, and also to review where the priorities are as well in terms of the council plan. You've got 2 years to finish delivery. What space are they in at the moment? And to remind the group about where those priorities are and, whether or not there needs to be any shifts at this point in time. So I agree with you, Steve. I think this is a really critical time to review all of that.
Good points all. And of course, Moira Shire is dealing with that because they've had 2 countbacks in the last week and a bit. The most recent one on Monday, which saw Wendy Buck, a former councillor, former deputy mayor, in fact, of about 10 years, brought back onto the council. Steve, in light of your comments a moment ago, getting a former experienced councillor back in the mix, does that change things at all in terms of how you approach that process of reintegration?
I don't think so, Chris. I think, one of the really critical things with someone who has previously been a councillor is that they've never worked under the 2020 Local Government Act. And there are some changes in dynamics, for example, there. I don't know. I wouldn't read too much into that. I think everyone comes to the table with their own background and experience, and it's about the fact that once elected people, each of the councillors should have a voice.
Tony, you're a former councillor and a former mayor. Have you ever been in that situation where the makeup of the group changed on your watch and you've had to confront those issues?
No, I haven't. And as we were talking, I was thinking of the incoming councillor and the challenge that it would be, walking into an environment where perhaps not for Wendy Buck, who, as you say, has lots of experience, but first term councillor coming in about now and having to get up to speed on all those rules of procedure and that other councillors have had a couple of years of practice at least on, a real challenge. But as Stephen and Julie say, it's an opportunity for the group to revisit as part of that welcome, and this is how we do things here, revisit just how are we working together and how can we improve in the lead up to the elections in another 2 years' time.
Might be a time when those councillors might need to have some kind of mentor or another councillor assigned to assist them through that process of getting up to speed. So something that maybe the sector should be thinking about.
Of course, there's been a recent countback result at Wodonga, and I believe they're now moving towards resolving the mayoral issue now that that's happened. And La Trobe is the only other outstanding council to conduct a mayoral election, and that's been scheduled for next Monday night. So we'll have that result next week. So that'll bring us to conclusion for the mayoral election season. We've got a couple of CEO appointments to talk about. We'll come to in just a moment. I did want to talk about a couple of councils being in the news this past week. And Tony, I don't know how often your phone rings as the lawyer in the group. Steve and I always have to say we're not a lawyer, but we don't have to say that this week because we've got you. How complex are rescission motions, and do you often get asked about the process around rescission motions? Because we've had 2 councils dealing with that in the last week.
Absolutely, and because it starts with what are the procedural rules and when do you have to get your rescission motion in and such. But one of the conundrums for councils is has that matter already been acted upon? And I'm often finding myself in a position where I'm saying to council officers or councillors who ask for advice on this, that I say, well, you may not have had this conundrum if you actually had moved on the motion and acted upon it a bit sooner, particularly where there's a scenario where there's a very strong majority in favour of the motion and there's a one-out councillor who wants to move a rescission motion. In those sort of circumstances, I'd be moving promptly to implement.
Just on that, Tony, this has exercised my mind a few times in the past. There's some precedents, I think, to suggest that once the decision has been communicated, and I guess it depends on the type of decision, that you can then argue legally that the decision has been acted upon. Is that true in all circumstances, I suspect?
Look, it wouldn't be in every circumstance, but I can, where it has been communicated and you would anticipate that the recipients of that information would then act upon it, potentially to their detriment. They might resource up because they believe they've been successful in a tender, etc. Then that would absolutely be a basis in which to say, you know, this decision has been implemented, it's been acted upon, and it would be inappropriate to unwind. Someone would be entitled potentially to some compensation.
Chris and Tony and Julie, I wonder if this sort of goes to the point that you would never preempt the decision that a council's going to make. And it's really important as officers, we respect that. But equally, it's never a bad thing to have your correspondence ready to go first thing the next morning.
Spoken like an experienced council officer.
An experienced governance officer, no less, Tony.
That's right. And I remember times when I've gone to the staff, go, let's go.
Care to tell us more about those circumstances, Julie?
No.
No.
Okay. Never going to share my trade secrets.
So the reason this has come up, if anyone wants to catch up, Yarra had an altered motion, an altered recommendation became a motion to change their meeting frequency, which one other councillor in particular challenged and brought a rescission motion, which was ultimately unsuccessful. The original decision stood. At Marybeck, the decision to cease citizenship ceremonies on the 26th of January. There was a rescission motion brought by a councillor against that. I gather on the grounds that there was concern about what the federal government might do about that council's ability to hold citizenship ceremonies at all, as it happened to, I think it was Yarra and Darebin, who'd made similar decisions. Previous federal government, I'd be surprised if this government takes that heavy-handed approach, given what I'm hearing about, you know, they're looking pretty closely at that issue. But ultimately, it was clear that no one else was going to support that motion. It got withdrawn at the last moment, and the decision stands. Thoughts on implications from that?
My thoughts on it are more the broader cultural one. If we, touch on culture for a moment, that, culture is the way we do business around here. And one of the issues around rescission motions is how seriously do we take the decisions of council? Does the council have a culture that once the decision is made, that is the decision, we'll fall behind it and act on it? And so, one-off rescission motions might be sort of harmless, but if there is a culture of regular rescission motions, then, you would have to ask some questions about that underlying culture.
All right, good thought, Steve. Now, CEO appointments in the news this week. As I've been saying for a while, there's been 7 or 8 that need to be resolved. What tends to happen, as has happened this week, is one gets resolved, which adds another to the list, because I think you would all know Andrew Mason at Corangamite. He's been in the role there for about 12 years, been at that council for a bit longer than that. Andrew's been appointed to Warrnambool City Council and will take over from Peter Schneider early next year. So that means a vacancy's coming up at Corangamite, but our congratulations to Andrew. That's a good move for him, I think.
Good move for Warrnambool. Win-win all round, I would have thought, Chris.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll watch that with interest as to the timing for Corangamite. And we've been waiting for quite some time at Glenelg. This has been a very civilised and smooth process, with Greg Burgoyne announcing some months ago that he wouldn't be seeking to continue. And this week, the council has appointed Paul Phelan to the role. Paul has been at that council since mid last year as the Director of Community Services. So congratulations to Paul. That one doesn't now create another one on the list that needs to be filled. Julie?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Chris, it's time to all move down to Glenelg, because Paul is an ex-Victoria Police officer and also worked with the Department of Child Safety and in the Queensland Department of Children and Families. So it's going to be a very, very safe place down at Glenelg under Paul's leadership.
Very good. That's a bit of intelligence I didn't have. Thank you, Julie. All right. So congratulations there. So I think there's 7, I want to say, on the list that still need to be resolved in some way. Melbourne and Greater Geelong being the big ones. Stonington's on there, of course. Northern Grampians. I think we're due for an announcement from Gannawarra pretty soon. The current CEO finishes up next week, and we wish Tom O'Reilly all the best in whatever comes next for him. So, and there's 1 or 2 more that I'm not recalling off the top of my head. So it's a busy and interesting space at the moment around local government CEO land.
Yes, and Chris, I believe Jackie Weatherall is starting at Greater Dandenong around about, I think it's the 19th of December.
Right.
So we're really looking forward to seeing what Jackie has to offer Greater Dandenong. So I know the team down there are really excited about Jackie's entry.
Good luck to Jackie. I'm sure she'll enjoy that role very much, and they'll enjoy having her there. Just before I get to your year-end reflections, highlights, lowlights, etc., just to give you a bit of a notice that we're coming to that, I did want to mention a significant piece of work that's been released in New South Wales this week. And this just goes to show that every jurisdiction is dealing with the issue of councillor conduct and how best to manage that. The minister there, Wendy Tuckerman, appointed a long-serving CEO from Queensland, Gary Keller. I think he was the general manager at Logan for about 26 years or something like that. I hope I'm not making up that number. It was certainly a long period of time. Gary's done this independent review of the misconduct framework in New South Wales and come up with 49 recommendations. They're quite extensive, including quite significantly a whole new independent framework for dealing with councillor misconduct. I'm not sure if any of you had a chance to have a look at that. My sense is he's looked at other jurisdictions and picked the best parts from other states, and they might end up having the model system, depending what happens with these recommendations. Thoughts, Tony?
Yeah, I think Victoria, in a way, has led the charge on this initially, and now we're now seeing other states. South Australia recently, now in New South Wales, have been publishing their conduct or behavioural standards and their regime for enforcing that. Probably what it allows us to do in Victoria now is perhaps to look at those more refined models and consider, is there anything that we want to pick up from them to help just improve our own standards of conduct model, our own councillor conduct panel regime. But we're interested to see the implementation of those New South Wales regime. I gather there's regional structures for the conduct panel process with the commissioners sort of overseeing each region, which is different to the process in Victoria.
Exactly, and that's what I wanted to get the group's thoughts on, this idea of an independent council or conduct commission. So a centrally appointed independent commissioner overseeing these sort of regional panels to deal with those misconduct issues is an interesting way of approaching it. I'm not sure if it's based on something that exists anywhere else.
Yeah, Chris, I'm really interested in that model. I think that if it means that there's a bit more resource for those regions to support the conduct of councillors and those issues that they find themselves in often, I think this is a very exciting opportunity to be able to watch how that unfolds and what kind of benefit the councils in those regional areas get. So, one to watch really closely. And I think having a commissioner or a commission that's set up to manage that with hopefully appropriate resources could be of real benefit to the sector.
Good point, Julie. Chris, also the VLGA in its submission to the Culture Review made a similar suggestion, but also including that such a body might have the resources to support councillors in some of their decision making. And I think there were a number of other submissions that made kind of similar recommendations about giving that level of independence.
All right, so we will watch that with great interest. Those 49 recommendations are subject to public submissions now from the sector and other interested parties, and I think the intention is that next year, hopefully not too far into the next year, there'll be a government response to that, and we'll see what the next steps are. So one to keep an eye on. Okay, the year is just about done. It's certainly from a governance update point of view, and I was really keen to get your thoughts on what will stay with you as highlights, lowlights, particular things to take away from the year that was. Tony, I know you've given this some thought, so perhaps I can start with you.
Yeah, well, I think pick up on that last point, certainly the standards of conduct question, we've seen a lot of evolution as we've seen some more decisions coming out from councillor conduct panels, that issue as to, what does amount to misconduct, and in a conduct panel context, what amounts to serious misconduct, what is bullying. We've certainly seen examples of councillors alleging bullying when the decision has indicated, well, it's robust debate, and sometimes it's a councillor who perhaps hasn't been communicating as well with their colleagues and has decided that's representative of bullying, and the decision has been that that's not the case. In other cases, we've learned that where there's repeated conduct that is putting other councillors, other council officers, in fear of their own safety, then that will amount to bullying. That will be serious misconduct, and there will be, a negative finding against the councillor. And perhaps the difference between that suggested model in New South Wales and Victoria, and perhaps the bit of the vacuum in Victoria that we haven't got, the empty space we haven't got, is that we have to wait for these decisions. There's not that body that is with resources that is just providing content and updates for councils as to what appropriate standards of behaviour are, what sort of incidents would amount to breaches. We're forced to wait the outcome of councillor conduct panel decisions, sometimes waiting many months, of course.
And Tony, just playing devil's advocate here, it's just when you think you might have a sense of what constitutes misconduct or serious misconduct, you get a decision like happened with Hume in the last week or so, where a finding of serious misconduct has been overturned by VCAT. And I wonder whether anyone's got thoughts on whether that changes things at all for the way we look at this topic.
Yeah, look, absolutely, because the councillor conduct panel decisions aren't governed by precedent. And similarly, VCAT operates in a bit more of a precedent environment, but they're not as constrained as the courts. But I've got a view on this, as I've probably shared with most of you, is that I think it's difficult to regulate for courteous behaviour. Certainly, we should be regulating for against bullying, harassment, these sorts of behaviours. But regulating for courtesy is a very difficult thing, and I think there's been some attempts made to use that councillor conduct panel process to really have perhaps unsavoury behaviour by councillors that is not serious misconduct, but it's just something that we regard as discourteous, a bit infantile, as being regulated. And I think VCAT decisions are likely to say, no, that's not what the regulations are meant to control.
Yeah. Mm.
And Chris, it's interesting because at the end of the day, there's lots of tension that's created through going through these processes. And one thing that I learned in 33 years of local government, it's all about relationships. And, it's about, well, how do you bounce back from something like that and still have relationships that are effective around the table? So, it's kind of interesting going down through that route and then coming out the other end and saying, are we going to be able to have a genuine relationship around the table and work together? That's, at the end of the day, is the nub of it, really.
Good points, Julie. And I do want to highlight what Hume CEO Sheena Frost said in the press after that decision came out. And I quote, she said, "This case has highlighted the challenges of managing councillor conduct matters in Victoria, in this system. The system is time-consuming, costly and ineffective, and she hopes the outcome will encourage councillors to work together, as you're talking about, Julie, and to resolve disputes informally." Sensible comments. Whether in practice that's what we see going forward, I guess, remains to be seen. Tony, did we get through your highlights and lowlights, or did you have anything else you wanted to share?
I'd probably just add that social media conundrum has grown again this year, and I think we've got to a point perhaps where we probably would love to see some resourcing put in from whether it's local government Victoria, somewhere just to help councils with social media policies, whether it's some good template policies. We've seen this year county court decision of Cavendish Properties and Councillor Howe out of Kingston, and showing just how onerous some of the the sanctions can be, where there are comments made on social media that are regarded as defamatory, and I know that decision's currently in a process of appeal at the moment, but a lot of councils themselves who run social media platforms and councillors will be struggling with how do we use this awesome tool, this real-time tool, but in a way also that protects the individual and the organisation from liability for inappropriate comments, potentially defamatory comments that are made on social media. And it's also, we see it as often something that's cited in councillor conduct panel cases, allegations that social media has been used in a way that is in breach of the standards of conduct.
It's scary. The outcome of that was pretty scary, and as you say, it's still going through an appeal process. But I think it was about $150,000 in terms of
$205,000, $215,000 even. I think.
Right. Yeah. Even scarier. Scarier. Yeah. All right. Julie, can I ask you for some off the top of your head highlights and lowlights of the year?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, look, for me, certainly seeing the culture project at LGV unfold, and with there being the insights report and the discussion paper, it's fantastic to see that come out and to see what the sector was thinking in that space. To get that discussion on the agenda in a broader form, I think was fantastic. So really happy with seeing that, and Victoria leading on that project, as Tony mentioned before. The other thing that I'm always blown away with is councils in this emergency management space, Chris. I mean, just every single year, there's a bunch of councils that just get hammered with emergencies. We've seen what's happened with the floods recently. And, in talking to councils like Swan Hill and Maribyrnong recently, they're just so calm about it all, and they just get on with the job, and they just go in there and they clean up and they sweep up the mess, and they just go in and help rebuild those communities. And there's no accolades for them. There's no real recognition. There's no extra money coming forward for them to deal with this emergency management space. And they do an extraordinary job. And this is the time when I feel really proud to have been part of local government and to be working with local government, because they're just amazing in that emergency management space. I mean, how much more could you expect of them, really?
Yeah. Well, just to extend that a little bit, Julie, the weather patterns have created all sorts of issues for councils in dealing with public open space, roadside verges, all those, and obviously the state comes into that a little bit. There's been a lot of impatience, inflamed, I think, by the media from people, but we've also seen community members getting out with their mowers and, mowing parks and gardens and things, because they recognise rightly that nobody can keep up with that under these current circumstances. So I reckon there's a really interesting dichotomy that's been playing out there over that issue in particular most recently.
Yeah, and it's the focus on the things that council aren't doing rather than the things that council are doing, which frustrates me no end. It's really, there's, again, but to have those community members go in and help is an amazing story. That's what it should be all about, is about the community getting together and supporting each other. Yeah.
They all sound like highlights, Julie. Anything that jumps out at you as a low light?
Oh, look, I think, for me, what I'm hearing, and I really feel for the councils at this point in time, battling the staffing challenges, just can't get staff, particularly in those technical areas, engineers, project managers, planners, it's just over and over again. I hear this story, particularly for the rural councils, but I'm also hearing it now for the metro councils, which is a real challenge for the sector going forward. And just the rise in costs of construction, Chris, it's just phenomenal, and the councils are crippling financially as a result of these rising costs. Now, I know that's happening across the board, but it's something that is really going to put extra financial pressure on the sector and their long-term financial plans.
Yeah, these are all issues that we could spend a lot more time on, but I will just put in a plug for an interview that we've published this week as a special VLGA Connect episode with Jim McGee, the Mayor of Glen Ira, who's calling for a really serious conversation about how the sector is structured, funded, whatever, going forward. And he picks up on that particular issue you raised, Julie, and the fact that local government's a bit of an easy mark when it comes to pricing from the private sector, which I think is a big factor in that whole situation that needs somehow to be addressed. Steve, your thoughts on highs and lows for the year?
Chris, my highlight has been, and I've got family in South Gippsland, so I've been watching really closely, but the performance of the Return Council since the election at South Gippsland has just been, I think, what would you say, a triumph for democracy. The citizens of South Gippsland put up with some pretty appalling behaviour from the former council, and the fact that a new council's been able to come in, be really strategically focused, be customer focused, but be able to have disagreements in a civilised way, I think is a real exemplar for the sector. So, yeah, well done to Mayor and councillors and CEO and staff at South Gippsland is my highlight. And do you want my low light?
Yes, please. Unless anyone wants to jump in on South Gippsland. I think everyone's just nodding in furious agreement.
Oh, look, I think I agree with Steve. It's just amazing demonstration of how democracy can shift very quickly with the right people in the seats. And as you say, Steve, amazing opportunities now for South Gippsland. And the fact that you're talking about it is great for South Gippsland's reputation, amazing.
Steve, your low light.
And this has been touched on, Chris, and this will come as no surprise to any listener of this program. Just the media generally, I think, there's the standard I've just found appalling. And I think it's worth saying that I don't know that any local government, professional communicator is ever going to expect a free ride from the media. Councils and all levels of government and corporate should be held to account by the media. That's the role of the fourth estate's particularly important. But we've just seen, and particularly from some of the major networks, if you like, both in print and electronic, gotcha moments, conflict, an absence of anything resembling policy analysis, a shift between complaining about rates and charges, and then rates and charges are down, so complaining about absence of service. There's nothing, and just some appalling standards of one-sided journalism. And maybe the opportunity in there, Chris, is that, to your point about that terrific interview with Jim McGee, that, getting some of the structural issues for local government on the table becomes all the more important if that's the media landscape that we're working in.
Steve, your low light in a way is also a highlight, because that episode of the governance update where you got stuck into Carl Stefanovic, appropriately so, is the most watched episode of the governance update for the year on YouTube. Did you know that?
I'm sure Carl's extraordinarily bruised by it, Chris. Not.
I wouldn't think so. All right. Look, you've touched on so much stuff there. I'm not sure that I can add to that in terms of highlights and lowlights, although I think a bit of a low light is the number of issues that, from an integrity point of view, seem to be stuck in a pipeline. Need to be careful, I guess, what we say about this, but there's a couple of issues. I mean, Operation Sandon is one that, the sector's been waiting to hear the outcome for some time. And my sense is, and you guys might correct me on this, that it's largely held up for legal reasons. And I don't think it's the only case that's held up in that way. Is that fair?
I think Mr. Redlick's, actually, Tony will know this better than me. I think Mr. Redlick's been pretty clear about that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's this conundrum around, natural justice and giving individuals who are named, presumably, in these reports an opportunity to, present their case before it's made public. But we're seeing this, you know, across a number of local governments. I think there's a major report at Hepburn Shire that we're waiting on. Yeah, so it's the legal system's desire to give everyone a fair run, where they're particularly affected by you know, a report against the public's need really to see some action. And I think sometimes the balance may have swung a little too much in favour of the individual, and maybe there's some frustration in some communities about the delay in seeing the reports and then seeing the action that's going to flow as a result of the recommendations that come through.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that frustration out of Hepburn Shire. You're right, Tony. I think an opinion piece just in the last week or so in the press there. I did have a highlight, and it was sort of linked to something that I thought you were going to raise, Tony, but I might have cut you off. And it's sort of a highlight and a low light all wrapped up in one, and that's the use of monitors around the sector. And we've had, I've got a list of them on the Local Government News Roundup website. We've had 7 pretty much at one point in time. I say it's a highlight in some ways because particularly when Sean Lean was the Minister for Local Government, he was sending a very strong message of proactiveness in dealing with issues that might be developing at councils and giving them a tool to work their way through and out of that. I see you nodding, Julie. Was that the intent? It certainly seemed to be the intent at the time.
Yeah, it was, because the minister at the time was really clear that he really didn't want to be in the get to the point where he had to recommend sacking of councils. And so, you know, for him, it was like, be proactive, try and intervene much earlier so then we can stop the governance of these councils actually falling over.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually worked really well, Chris. I think, you know, having that interaction with the monitor early, you know, the monitor trying to go in there and trying to help them update their policies to make sure everything was really working well, and to have a sounding board for the council was, I think, a fantastic move, and hopefully provided a bit of support as well to the CEOs.
Most of them, I think, are coming to the end of their term as we speak. I know one has started to write their report, which is due by the end of January, and that wouldn't be the only one. Some have finished, such as the one at Moira, which has been replaced by a Commission of Inquiry. And I know you can't say too much about that, Tony, but I think that Commission of Inquiry is due to report back by the end of February next year. So,
yeah, there've been public hearings or public opportunities for the public of Moira to speak to those commissioners. I think there's opportunities for written submissions through into I think the 20th of January.
Right.
And the current time frame, I think, is for the Commissioner to report back to the Minister in February.
So there's a bit to look forward to in the early part of next year. Does anyone care to make any predictions about what we'll be talking about as a particular highlight or low light 12 months hence?
Oh, well, that you'd have to be brave to do that in local government. But I think I think we can predict there'll be some common themes. We'll still be talking about, you know, the challenges of that local government have faced for years and years in terms of that sense of a cost shift, and that's just been exacerbated with the inflationary sort of regime we're under at the moment. So I think that's not going to go away. And you know, the some of the other themes around, you know, social media, around how do we manage our standards of conduct, they're still going to be there, and that's just something we're going to have to deal with moving forwards. But there are some real positive signs on the horizon that, you know, we are finding new ways to deal with old problems.
And Chris, I think that, well, I'm hoping to see more innovation in local government, bearing in mind the tightness of budgets. I'm hoping that we'll be talking about some innovative projects that maybe some councils have developed that might be revenue raising. I think that there's definitely a focus on that at the moment. There's going to need to be a bit more energy in that space. So looking for opportunities and examples that we can fly the flag on and say, you know, isn't this fantastic that Council X has created something new and exciting for the community, but also been able to generate a bit of revenue as a result.
So, Julie, you talk about innovation. My view is 2023 in a 4-year council cycle is the year that councils have the opportunity to kick goals, make big decisions, big bold decisions, strategic projects, etc., before the 2024 election cycle sort of gets in the way. And on innovation, I just want to send a shout out to Macedon Rangers and Monash, who this week both have received some coverage for work they're doing in the soft plastics recycling space, which is a huge issue for everyone at the moment. There's a trial at Macedon Rangers. There's a new arrangement that Monash has put in place. I'm pretty sure there's 77 other councils looking at what those two councils are doing at the moment to see whether they might have come up with a way to deal with this very wicked problem.
Yeah, awesome. Who would have thought the little community of Romsey might be, come up with something that might change how we deal with soft plastics across the state. So awesome little trial going on there. And we're really exciting to see the outcome of that.
So I was going to ask if each of you have a pick of the week. That's certainly a pick of the week. I know there's a story out of England that's caught your eye, Tony, before we wrap up.
Yeah, the really extensive resources, the research unit for Governance Connect. We go to know all links, don't we, across the globe. But I did.
Is that your way of saying that you've been reading the Daily Mail?
On the Moondah train to the city this morning, something did strike my fancy, which was about a council in Wales, Conwy Council, which is in North Wales, but dealing with an issue that we deal with in Victoria, which is council meetings conducted over the Zoom platform. And Councillor Andrew Wood, who represents Gale and Lundulus at Conwy Council, some videos emerged of Councillor Wood this week of him attending that council meeting on Zoom whilst driving his car, and the car seems to be moving. He's steering and he's raising his hand and voting while gazing at the camera screen. So
I wonder where his meeting papers are during all of this.
Yes, well, he's certainly been accused of being reckless by other councillors, and perhaps understandably, we should say he's come out and denied that it occurred, although the footage seems quite telling.
It's pretty definitive, I would have thought.
Yeah, but I guess it's clearly there's probably some road rules being breached, but then the idea that we'd expect that councillors are concentrating on the matter at hand, the council meeting, the debate that's going on, and aren't attempting to do something quite challenging at the same time, driving a car, reading a book, watching TV, or whatever else that potentially they might be doing in that remote virtual environment.
Yeah.
And look, Chris, that takes hybrid working to the next level.
It really sure does, Julie.
And obviously, the future holds driverless vehicles. So in the future, when we have driverless vehicles, councillors will be able to have that kind of hybrid working. So we look forward to the day when we're in that space.
Oh, the mind boggles. Okay. Has anything caught your eye this week, Julie?
Yes, it has actually, Chris. I'll go to the UK as well. It's Bournemouth and Poole councils. There's been a bit of a faux pas, I think, by one of the officers where they have spoken publicly about some commercial sensitivities, some properties that they were potentially going to purchase and do create some assets, and I think they've actually breached confidentiality. So I think just a reminder, from a governance perspective, I know, Steve, you'll love this, just a reminder about confidentiality and how tight that it needs to stay. When it lands on the front page of the Yahoo News across the world, and people go, what?
Not a good look.
Not a good look. But anyway, just a reminder to everybody how important that is.
We'll pop the links to these into the show notes if we can. Steve, anything that caught your eye?
It might be just over a week, Chris, and a bit of a segue from Julie's comment about driverless vehicles, because I want to talk about Elon Musk.
Okay.
And a little piece
rich pickings there, Steve.
A little piece on the Axios Twitter feed just over a week ago that some might recall that Elon Musk in his takeover of Twitter is downsized, and he's going to have a workforce that works extremely hard. And so he announced a plan to provide bedding for the hardworking Twitter staff at their Los Angeles headquarters. Now, that has caught the ire of the mayor of the local council, because the planning ordinance for the commercial zone that the office is in might not allow for staff bedding. So we watch this space with interest.
Oh, that's fabulous. All right, you get the prize for that one, Steve. I hate to bring it down. The one I was going to mention is out of Turkey, where the mayor of Istanbul this week has actually been sentenced to jail time for the offence of publicly criticising the supreme leadership of that country. I understand when you dig a bit deeper that the mayor of Istanbul is seen as a political rival to President Erdogan. I think I'm saying that right. So there might be more factors at play there. I'll pop that link in the show notes too. But I think that just serves as a reminder of how lucky we are to be in a country like Australia with free speech and democratic institutions. All right, I think we've reached the end. Thank you all very much for your insights and contributions to this 2022 retrospective and a bit of look at the latest news. It just remains for me to thank you in particular, Tony, as the sponsor from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers of the governance update here at VLGA Connect, but also for joining us on the show today and previously. Thank you, Tony.
Awesome job by you, Chris, ably supported through most of the year by Steve Cooper. You're the heart and soul of this podcast production. And well done, mate.
Thank you, Tony. That's very kind. Julie Reid, always a pleasure to have you, and I hope we'll be spending more time with you in the future. Thank you for your contribution this week.
Thanks, Chris.
And Steve Cooper, lovely to see you as always. Open invitation. I know you've got a bit on, but you're welcome back here anytime.
Thanks, Chris, and really enjoyed today. Good opportunity to have a yarn with good people.
Indeed. All right. Thank you all very much once again, and thank you to our viewer and listener for joining us again. And we hope to see you in 2023 for all new governance update from VLGA Connect. Have a great Christmas, New Year if you celebrate, or a great holiday break if you're having one, and I hope you are. And we'll see you all again very soon. Bye for now.